Games as a service, or more commonly referred to as live service games, have become a hot topic as of late due to the modern state of gaming. Many have aired their criticisms toward the model and expressed interest in returning back to the older models of gaming. However, I ask, is that just nostalgia speaking, or were games in the past truly better? Today we're going to take a step back, examine the entire live service model, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, so strap on in and pull out your credit card because we're getting fancy, just like the $87 Valorant bundle you can go and buy today. The premise of the live service game, even though it varies from product to product, can be simplified as a game that aims to provide an endless stream of content funded by various forms of monetization. Some do this much better than others, but these days most multiplayer games, and heck even some co-op games, the best of the best here offer fans of a game a constant stream of fun new content, cosmetics, and various other goodies. While the worst end up shells of games that often drip feed content, sometimes even cutting off support completely before the game gets into a good place. Live service games have been around for a long time. This isn't anything new, but it's more recently that the model has basically infected all forms of gaming. If you play multiplayer games, or really just game at all, you probably play a live service game in some way, shape, or form. While the exact inception of the model is hard to pinpoint, one of the early leaders of this style of monetization was actually the MMO genre as a whole. And with that, we obviously have to talk about World of Warcraft, which took the MMO genre to a whole new level. In general, MMOs used to be based around a subscription and expansion pack model where players would pay a certain amount of money every single month just to be able to play, and then there would also be a larger fee every time an expansion would drop. These expansions in general would be huge drops of content, completely changing or overhauling portions of the game while adding in tons of new content to complement the existing suite of content. Now, we can't understate how amazingly this model worked for World of Warcraft, as it basically turned Blizzard into the powerhouse that it became, even though lately they have struggled quite a bit.
Is this an out-of-season April Fool's joke?
At one point in 2010, World of Warcraft reached a peak subscriber count of 12 million subscribers. That's 12 million players paying on a monthly basis. That is a whole ton of money flowing into the pockets of Blizzard every single month, and this didn't even include additional purchases, which continued to expand over the years, like cosmetics, level boosts, server transfers, name changes, and much more. Basically put, World of Warcraft was making absolute bank. But the thing is it was also providing fans of the game a whole new world that they could immerse themselves in that continued to expand and evolve. And obviously, while interest would have its peaks and valleys, at the height of World of Warcraft's popularity, hardcore fans could truly be World of Warcraft only players or World of Warcraft focused gamers. Without the gold rush of MMOs, the gaming landscape would probably look a lot different today. Not long after the MMO explosion, we also got the 7th generation of consoles, which ushered in a whole new form of live service. While for the most part games at this point still had their $60 price tags, usually including single player and multiplayer offerings, we began to see more and more developers add additional content to their games before they would move on to the sequel or a new product. This was termed downloadable content, or more commonly referred to as DLC. Now again, the 7th generation of consoles was not the first time this existed. It had existed on PC, and technically the Dreamcast was the first console to feature online support, and DLC was available on that platform, and the PlayStation 2 also had the functionality. But it was really with the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 that we really saw this start to take off. Around 2005, we saw Microsoft include much more robust support for DLC via the Xbox Live Marketplace, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with today. This gave consumers a much easier way to browse the store with all sorts of DLCs and other goodies. Sony also followed suit with their storefront dubbed the PlayStation Store, and eventually Nintendo had their own store too. Around the same time roughly is when we saw the popularity of Steam began to really pick up on PC as a primary location to purchase PC games with its digital marketplace, later expanding into the multiple different storefronts that we have today. At this time though, it is important to note that DLC had not reached the point where MMOs were at. While yes, DLCs offered expansions, map packs, or various cosmetics to games, the game that you purchased out of the box usually still felt complete, and the DLC did feel like an additional thing that you could purchase if you wanted to have some more fun or get some more runtime out of a game you enjoyed. They were not the primary form of monetization though, and in many cases, things like map packs actually had some negative effects where they would greatly divide up the multiplayer player base, since a large portion of people just wouldn't buy the map packs at all. The model for most console games at the time, and even PC games since there's a lot of overlap, was still to release a game, add DLC, and then release a sequel, assuming the game was in need of a sequel, or move on to a new game altogether. The next step in the live service evolution is where it really started to feel like the modern system that we're used to now, and it's only ramped up over time. In 2008, Valve released the Gold Rush update for Team Fortress 2, which featured new weapons and cosmetic skins that could be unlocked with in-game achievements. And then future updates went on to add similar weapons, which started to include monetization options, and the infamous Team Fortress 2 hat meme was born. Eventually, Valve made so much money from this model, they just transitioned Team Fortress 2 to fully free to play, and used this model as the sole form of monetization. Valve eventually went on to use similar models in their other major franchises like Dota 2 and Counter-Strike Go. Around this time, it's also important to talk about the rise of smartphones, as this ushered in a whole new era of gaming. While before you could only play really rudimentary games on your phone like Snake, once we started getting smartphones, you could really have a full game right on your cell phone. And while mobile gaming kind of seems to be off in its own corner and isn't something you hear about all the time unless you're into mobile gaming, the influences that mobile gaming has had have reached all the way up to the largest of AAA releases in the modern age. While early mobile games were similar to the console brethren and just had an upfront cost, it was quickly realized the mountains of wealth that could be acquired from charging people small upgrades for various cosmetics, upgrades, skips, lives, or basically anything that you would want to do in a video game. These small charges, which are obviously dubbed microtransactions, have basically become a staple in all multiplayer games, and sadly even in a good portion of single player games. It is important to note that while microtransactions took longer to take off on console and PC than it did the mobile marketplace, there were definitely early adopters. There was a huge market of microtransactions in the sports game at the time, with their ultimate team style modes across the different games, whether it's FIFA or Madden, and there was also a sizable market of free-to-play quote-unquote rip-offs of existing games. Basically, you'd take a popular multiplayer game at the time, maybe it was Call of Duty, and you would release a free-to-play version chock full of microtransactions. At a time when most AAA games and major games still shipped with a price tag, these free-to-play titles could find player bases, even in many cases if they were inferior to the full-price game they were kind of taking inspiration from. From here, taking some influences from mobile games, you began to see more and more games include microtransactions. However, it is important to note that at this time in the early to mid 2010s, full releases with DLC and sequels were still generally the majority of games. There were, however, though, some very notable games that were beginning to make waves across gaming as the full live service kind of model that we're familiar with today. This is where we started to see things like League of Legends just take over the landscape. As time went on though, we began to see more and more games go live service. And while this worked for many, it also left a graveyard of unfinished and incomplete games that were abandoned before they kind of had their day. While this is obviously a very simplified history, the truth is that more and more games these days are released planning to be a live service game. In general, many developers are dropping games with the intention to continue support until it's no longer financially viable, as opposed to in the past when even the most popular games in the world had a shelf life. The reason the model has gotten so popular is honestly pretty straightforward. Live service games allow developers and publishers the ability to generate revenue for years on end, as opposed to mostly just around launch and some DLC. You also have the added benefit as there's a little bit less risk. Every time you released a new sequel or a brand new game, there is a chance that the game wouldn't be well received. Whereas when you release a new update for your live service game, while yes, many of them aren't received well, usually it can take multiple bad updates in a row before you start to kill out a live service game that has an existing fan base. Whereas one bad sequel could completely ruin an existing franchise. You also have the additional benefit that a certain subset of players dubbed whales will fork up a large portion of a game's revenue all on their own, and with all this put together, you end up with a model that can be very financially beneficial to both the developers and publishers. What does this mean though for players? Because while in many cases the live service game is presented in a negative light, there are benefits to us as the player. Before talking about those benefits though, it is important that we first discuss the many cons of the modern live service model. On a regular basis, the live service model has led to some of the most unfinished and buggy games that we have seen across the entire history history of gaming. Games like Battlefield 2042, Halo Infinite, Fallout 76, all released in an absolutely pathetic state, and while they will in theory improve over time, these were not games that should have been released to the public. Battlefield 2042 and Fallout 76 being games that did come with a price tag, whereas Halo Infinite was a free-to-play title. You also run into the problem where content for these games can feel like it is being drip-fed. I mean, obviously as a Halo channel, we can talk about Halo Infinite here, and that one's just a slam dunk. You can really tell how much the content has been drip-fed there, but you can also see this in a variety of other games. I see a new video about the new Madden game pretty much every year talking about all the features it doesn't have compared to previous Madden games, or this just goes for sequels of other games too. It seems on a regular basis when we get a sequel to a game, Destiny 2 comes to mind, it is actually an inferior product to the prior game just because the prior game had gotten years of live service support. These live service games also tend to have a heavy emphasis on microtransactions and monetization, and in some cases this can be really right in front of your face. Another thing that is kind of bad about these live service games is that support for them is regularly pulled once these publishers deem they aren't worth supporting anymore, and in some cases the servers get shut off altogether. This even is affecting single player games currently, as there was that news about Ubisoft, which just shelved support for a variety of their older titles, some of which are single player games that are going to be completely unplayable due to the fact that the servers they connect to are being shut down. Live service games can also kind of become a lifestyle rather than just a game. In the past, where it did really seem like games were something you could kind of play occasionally and still kind of keep up and have a good time, if you want to really get immersed in a single game, it basically has to be the only game you play. If you want to finish a battle pass for a game in the season it's released, most likely you're going to have to spend a good amount of your gaming time just on that one specific game to complete the battle pass before it expires. You could also argue that live service can ruin good games. World of Warcraft comes to mind here, where while obviously World of Warcraft isn't trash or anything now, you can point to a decline in quality over the more recent years of World of Warcraft. PUBG has also had issues. You could go on and on down this list. I mean, it kind of comes down to personal preference, but live service can take a very good product and slowly ruin it over time over various bad updates. You can also see tech debt really start to build up over years, and this can heavily slow down development or stop new features outright because it ends up being such a daunting task to overhaul some of the back end of this code and the game that was released 5 or 10 years ago just to be able to do new things. Whereas obviously with the older model getting sequels every X amount of years, that gave you a brand new starting point, and while you would maybe reuse the engine or something like that, you did have more of the ability to kind of start fresh. Whereas when you're just tacking on little updates over time, you don't necessarily have time to go over and overhaul and clean out that back end to make sure that you don't get a bunch of bugs or other weird interactions. There's also many other cons to the live service model. I'd be interested in hearing below what you think are some other ones that I didn't cover, but I do want to give the live service model a fair shake. So why don't we hop over now to the pros that I think come from the live service model. The first one to me being the best part of the live service model, and that's that games that you enjoy never end. Think about classic games that you absolutely loved back in the day, but maybe you don't really play them anymore because obviously they're old and they haven't been updated in 10 plus years. For me, being a Halo YouTuber, this is Halo 3. I can only imagine how cool it would be if Halo 3 was still regularly updated to this day as opposed to where the franchise went. There are so many games back in the day that were absolutely amazing but ended up just running their course due to the way that games used to work. And in some cases, the sequels that came out after these games ended up not being as good as the prior games, or in some cases like Titanfall 2, we never even got another game. Live service also offers new content on a regular basis. Fortnite, Apex, Valorant, League of Legends, these games are getting new content, both gameplay content and cosmetic content on a monthly, weekly basis, and that can keep a single game completely fresh. And obviously this allows you to sink ungodly amounts of time into a game while also being able to experience new things in this game. It also allows a game that released badly to actually recover. In the past, maybe that game would come out and flop and never be played at all, but in the modern age, you can see redemption stories. Rainbow Six Siege, Destiny, these all come to mind as games that did not release in a good state. Hell, even Fallout 76 released like trash like we talked about earlier, and honestly isn't a terrible product today and has its own fan base. You could also theorycraft a little bit here about some games in the past that maybe had a little bit of promise or were doing something unique that sort of flopped. What are some of these games that could have maybe been resurrected with a live service model? For me, maybe Brink comes to mind. I remember playing Brink in college and it seemed like a very interesting take on the shooter genre, but it ended up doing absolutely nothing due to a variety of issues that the game had. Maybe in a live service landscape, this game could have evolved and became a very popular game. Another pro is that these live service games are less likely to completely ruin a franchise with a bad sequel. There are many franchises over the history of gaming that had an amazing game, and then a sequel comes out and the sequel is not good, or it completely changes the game and it just doesn't give the fan base what they were expecting for out of a sequel. You don't see this as much in live service games, obviously, because the updates aren't going to be full sequels. They're going to be updates to the existing game, and while sometimes those can be bad updates, most likely a single bad update isn't going to completely kill a franchise, whereas a bad sequel could take a franchise that was popular or doing well and completely end it. It's also nice to see improvements over time. There were so many games in the past that I absolutely loved, but there were little things here and there that maybe I would have wanted to see improved or expanded upon a little bit. Well, live service games can do that. The game that you get on day one is not going to be the same game that you're playing in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. These games are going to improve and evolve over time, hopefully, and that can lead to cool things as a player of those games. In many cases, live service can be a good thing. However, in many other cases, it is greatly detrimental to the product. I'm glad things like Valorant, Fortnite, Apex, the list goes on, get continued support because I enjoy those games, and hopping back into them when new content drops is a ton of fun. But there are also cases where I wish the model did not exist, and I dream of a gaming landscape when games were shipped much more complete than they are today. Obviously, being a Halo channel, Halo Infinite is a prime offender here, and we're not going to even go into that because that's a whole rant on its own. There were many games I played when I was younger that would have been amazing if they got continued support over many years, and while I hate the way that microtransactions have gone, it is very nice that in most cases content for these products are available to everyone outside of cosmetics. Having that friend who wouldn't or couldn't get the new map pack for a Call of Duty or a Halo back in the day was always a huge bummer, since you literally just couldn't play the new content or experience the new content if you were planning to play with that friend. Also, admittedly, some of the new cosmetics in games are pretty cool. I mean, you can literally have a dragon as a sniper rifle in Valorant. Games like Valorant, Fortnite, Apex all have amazing cosmetics, even though they do in many cases also cost an arm and a leg, and that really isn't a thing that we got back in the day, where it seemed like games had much more down-to-earth customization, though you could easily argue that you also had much more freedom in customization since it wasn't all based around money. In reality, the idea of live service isn't a bad thing. It can be good for both the developers and consumers. However, the problem comes from greed. Greedy publishers trying to milk microtransactions or ship a game earlier than it's ready are the prime reason that the live service model is despised. It allows them to get away with things that would not have worked in the past, as those games, just simply put, would have never sold. Instead, today players will now stick around for months or years on end, basically just hoping that things will get better. Or even if they stop playing the game, they might come back as things start to improve, even if the launch of the game was something that they absolutely despised. Obviously, if it takes too long for a game to improve, that's when you see live service games die, or even sometimes just die for a variety of other reasons. But if there's one thing that I've learned from the Halo community, it's that some people will just hopefully wait for what seems like an endless amount of time. Sure, a game might not be great now, but if they have an attachment to that game or franchise, they're going to look forward to improvements or additions that should have been there at launch. The problem though that I see is these games seem to be getting worse and worse as the years go on, and I do fear there really is no going back. AAA game quality seems to drop year by year, and that is something that we're going to continue to see as time goes on. All in all, it's hard to say whether or not I like the current trend of live service games. In some cases, I certainly do, and in many other cases, I definitely despise it. Modern gaming has serious issues, from bugs, lack of originality, microtransactions, to a whole slew of other issues. Just pick the topic that applies to you the most. Regardless though, we all still tune into new game after new game, hoping it's exactly what we wanted it to be, and in a lot of cases, well, it isn't. And that, guys, is gonna do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed this one. We spent a lot of time on this one, so if you did enjoy the video, please like it, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff, but also maybe share it to some of your friends. I would love to spend more time doing videos like this. I think they have much more purpose than some of the kind of quicker content that I do, but obviously it also takes a lot more time to create something like this. As always, guys, make sure you follow me over on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, all the good places, and I will see you all next time.